Hello and welcome to class. It's week 4 and we're moving into close to the halfway point of the class. Now you should have gotten your papers back by now, and that'll give you a little more feedback about how you're doing in the class and how you're progressing in your understanding of the literature, as well as a way to summarize it and synthesize it in your discussions and writings. So this week we're going to be moving into a new era of theories. This will be called the systems management theories. And I always find the easiest way to kind of start talking about this is to lay out a little picture. And the idea behind systems theory is that all systems have a input, something coming into them, a process which processes it, and then an output that leaves the system and moves on to another system. Now, you might think, well, how does this have anything to do with management? Well, if you start thinking about it, the interest in coming up with a general systems theory that could be applied to almost anything can start with your own biological systems, your nervous system and your digestive system. We also have information systems, and we have the solar system, and we have different types of systems, biological systems, ecological systems at all levels. So it turned out to be a fairly useful way to explore many different aspects of both animate and inanimate life in our universe. And consequently, people thought they had finally stumbled upon a unifying principle that could be applied to everything around us. Okay? We won't be looking at quite the same level. However, systems theory goes back quite a while. Here are some of the major contributors. You'll notice this is broken into several sections. So we have systems theory in the area of humanities. Systems theory is applied to natural sciences, engineering, and so on. What we're going to be looking at is the social sciences, and there you'll see some of the authors, researchers that are have shown up and are mentioned in your reading for this week. For example, Miller, is mentioned as actually credited with being kind of the originator, the person who saw that systems theory could be applied to management systems and organizations. You'll hear about Boulding. Herb Simon is another person that contributed to this field. So this kind of gives you a smattering of research that's been done in the area of systems in different fields of study. Now, generally, systems theory originated prior to the advent of computers, but when computers in the 1950s began to make inroads and computer programming began to be developed, obviously systems then kind of took on a whole new meaning, and we could see many aspects of not only information processing but artificial intelligence and other things now being described as systems. So let's get into what we're going to be doing this week. You have a discussion which is going to be basically reviewing and analyzing and synthesizing the readings from this week. And what I'd like you to do, now that you've got a little bit of background from the other theories, from classical theories and behavioral human relations theories, some of this stuff is going to start familiar and you say, hey, I know what they're talking about. Well, that's the whole idea. We know systems, we know theories. Going a little too fast for myself here. We know theories evolve from previous theories, and thus, as we would expect, systems theories are not totally isolated from every sort of management theory that came before. And so what I'd like you to do is to try to identify in which ways system theories are similar to what we've looked at before, or are different, what was added by systems theories, what advanced aspects of earlier theories, you know what I mean. The other part of the assignment for this week is a paper. This is going to be a 6 to 8 page paper, a little longer than the last one. And again, as I think everybody knows, that 6 to 8 means the body of the paper. It doesn't include the title page. If you write a separate abstract on a page, it doesn't count that. It doesn't count the reference list. So 6 to 8 pages of text where you're building your argument for the point you've decided to make in your particular paper. So this one is going to combine weeks 3 and 4. So you're going to be looking at human relations theories and the systems theories from that perspective, and also putting them into the context of the overall development of management thinking that we've been studying from the very first day of class. Okay, so in general, you should use the week 2 paper as kind of a model, and the responses that I've put back on there, the feedback that you got as to what I was looking for. And I'll spend a little bit of time at the end of this presentation talking a little bit more about where we need to improve, what I'm looking for in terms of development of your analysis and writing. So, as you see in the rubric that I sent back, it does specify the requirements of the paper, when it should be turned in, how long it should be, is staying on topic. Okay, pay attention to those, because those are going to contribute to the overall quality. You need to base it on peer-reviewed literature. The more, the better, as long as it's all relevant and it's useful in your writing. Again, write for a non-professional audience. You can't expect everybody who's reading your paper to know the terminology that you're using unless you explain it. Try to use a direct and straightforward writing fashion. Follow the APA format and referencing requirements. Okay, so these are just kind of going over the fundamentals again, as you saw in the rubric that I returned with the last paper. But at this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about the dissertation, which for some of you is going to be something that's, well, not immediately coming because you're going to be going into your concentrations, but something that we'll be talking about in residency too. And for some of you it's far away, but everybody is always interested in thinking about, well, what's my dissertation going to be? And it's probably useful to work from the basis of what the process is that we use here at Kaiser, because this is what you'll be dealing with eventually. Well, first of all, the net result, the end result of your dissertation process will be a 5-chapter dissertation. That's kind of the standard approach that we use here. The first chapter will be the introduction. The second chapter will be the literature review. Here we'll be looking at least 2 streams of literature. I'll talk more about streams of literature later. Then the third chapter is the methodology section, where you explain what type of data collecting techniques you're going to be using and what sort of analytical techniques you're going to be using. Chapter 4 is the findings, where you explain the statistical results in terms of testing your hypotheses. And then in Chapter 5, you convert that all into English and tell your readers what the significance of what you found out was and how it could be applied and become a foundation for future research. So that's the result, but how do you get there? Well, because I found that people were kind of struggling with this, I developed what I call and is being called the 2-stream literature gap model, or TSLG for short. And the way the TSLG model starts is with a stream of literature taken from a body of literature. And that's one of the reasons that we do all this reading about prior theories and classical management theories and human relations theories, so that you become familiar with the literature. And as you get into your concentrations, you'll become very familiar with the literature in your particular concentration, because that's where your ideas about what you might like to write about, that's where they're going to come from. As we've seen, theory is built upon theory, and in a way you might consider your dissertation to be a mini theory that's going to be built upon existing theory. But you're going to also need a second stream of literature, which could come out of the same general field that you're working in. So if you're in leadership, you might choose 2 different leadership theories to kind of compare and contrast, see how one led to the other. Or you might find that you want to do something with marketing and classical management theory. Okay, so they don't necessarily have to be in the same place. Those of you who go into leadership are going to find that a lot of leadership theory comes out of the field of psychology. So a lot of dissertations and research literature comes by combining aspects of leadership with various aspects of human behavior and human thinking and learning and things like that. So we're going to take 2 streams of literature. We're going to boil them down and synthesize them, defining a gap where the 2 streams come together, and a bridge where you show how these 2 streams are going to benefit each other. These 2 theories, theoretical bases, are going to benefit each other by being tied together. This is called the prospectus stage. This is what you're doing when you finish your concentration classes and you go into the dissertation classes. You'll be trying to work on and develop your prospectus. Some of this hopefully will be done before you get to the final stage, Okay, but the idea is you need to know something about the field you're going to be working in and the literature that's available to come up with the ideas about what you might want to do in that field. Okay, so the gap is the two streams of literature that have now been brought close together, and the bridge is what you propose is the logical linkage between these two streams. Once that's approved, you will then be assigned, or a committee will be assigned to your dissertation. Okay, and then we move on to the next stage, which is the prospectus stage. Here you're going to be developing the methodology, the data collection methods, kind of coming up with what your target population is going to be. Okay, so all the purple stuff is the next phase, and that brings us, when complete, to the proposal defense. And this will be done online or in person in front of a group of administration, faculty, and potentially other students who will hear your presentation, ask you questions. And if approved, if you pass that, you get to move on. Each one of these, both the prospectus stage and the proposal stage, are set up as thou shalt not move on. You can't pass go until you do this, because we don't want people working upon methodology and data collection when they don't even have the theory that they're going to be working from. Okay, so these are kind of sequential stages that have to be passed and approved by the appropriate people at that time for you to be able to move on. So we've passed the proposal defense and we're ready to go start collecting data, but first we have to make a pit stop at the internal review board, which will look at the proposed data collection population, how you're going to reach them, what kind of questionnaires or surveys or whatever observations you're going to be using, and then that gets approved or modified until it meets the requirements of the Institutional Review Board. It's a separate body. Moving past them, then we start to collect data, mail out our questionnaires, put them up on the internet, go in and start running experiments, whatever you're going to be doing to collect data. And you analyze the data, usually through some sort of statistical techniques, and then you report the findings. This would be the statistical findings in terms of whether the hypotheses you proposed were accepted or rejected. And then that would produce Chapter 4, and then Chapter 5 is converting the results into English, summarizing the conclusions, stating how they will benefit both the theoretical literature that you're contributing to, as well as how it might be applied in by practicing managers. At this stage, there's a final defense scheduled. Again, you go through and present your entire dissertation to administration, faculty, and students. And if that is approved, you then have a dissertation, and you should have completed your doctorate. So that's the process that we go through, and everybody kind of faces this, and trying to bypass some particular stage of it generally isn't very effective and just wastes everybody's time. So become familiar with the literature in your field. Don't fight the idea that you've got to learn the theories and you have to understand who the main contributors were. And you have to start to look at how these ideas are synthesized to become new ideas. Speaking of synthesis, I've mentioned several times this thing called Bloom's taxonomy of learning. And Bloom is used at Kaiser quite a bit, referenced how we need to look at learning and assess student learning. And at the bottom of the pyramid or triangle is knowledge. And learning at that level means that you can recall information, you can pass a test on it, you've read something, you remember it, you know what the names are. Okay, it's a fairly low level, but obviously important. The next level is comprehension, where there's a higher level of learning and understanding involved. You can actually talk about it and discuss it, place it into context. The next level up is application. You can find ways of applying that knowledge to different situations. Then there's analysis and synthesis, and finally evaluation. What you will hear me do in your discussion posts and in the paper reviews is talking about moving up this triangle, that we just don't need a review of what the theories are, and we don't need a review of what the article said. That's simply saying I read it and I can write about it. But the idea is we really need to move up this triangle to the point where you're using the existing knowledge, the existing ideas that have been presented in the literature to come up with new ideas. Okay? By combining and synthesizing. Not simply saying, well, in my experience this happened, but by using the literature, different articles' perspectives, different authors' perspectives. You can say, if you put these two together and you look at this person's opinion versus this person's writings about it and the data they presented to support their ideas, this is actually telling us something new that they haven't mentioned yet. Why is that important? Because if you refer to the previous slide, that was exactly what I was talking about when you come up with your research idea, which is the gap and the bridge. Okay, so you have to learn to synthesize because that's what it's going to take to write a dissertation. Okay, well, that's all I want to get into now. You'll hear more about this, more of the details later, but at some point it's important to understand both the dissertation process as well as Bloom's taxonomy, because you'll hear about both of them quite a bit. So, the key to success. You should have received your week 2 papers by now and had a chance to look over the rubric that I've accompanied them with. So look over that, try to take advantage of the things I said were good and avoid doing the things that I said were not so good or areas that you could improve. If you haven't done so, take a look at the Scholarly Writing Part 2 video in the Start Here section of the class. You'll also find a couple of videos on the lit review process. Now, we're not really doing a complete lit review, however, it's a good idea to know how what we're doing here is going to fit into what you need to do for your dissertations. And your scheduling is important. When you start to work on a paper, you know that you can't sit down on Sunday evening and crank out eight good pages. You have to have a plan, you have to have preliminary drafts, you have to work it up to the finished stage, and you have to allow enough time for proofreading to get rid of all the little problems. Okay, so basically we're working into the kind of approaching the halfway point of the class, and I'd like to leave you with this. We're moving from human relations to systems. So, till next time, goodbye and good luck.